All right, so again, my name is Eric Maxwell, and I am a product manager over, and like Shiv said, I came down with air defense, but as far as air defense goes, my main feature set is proximity analytics, which is the presence-based and location-based services within the air defense product, but I can answer other questions about the air defense platform as well. So the first thing that we want to talk about is just a little overview of what proximity analytics is. Like I said, it is a purchasable module within air defense. It's just a license. You load it on the appliance, it enables the features, right? So the first part of it are the three proximity features that it enables. So we break it into three pieces. We have Wi-Fi presence, we call it Wi-Fi zone tracking, and Wi-Fi position tracking. So presence is pretty obvious what that is. Zone tracking, I'll talk about these in more detail. Position tracking is just more of the traditional, what you would think of location tracking. And this is all Wi-Fi based. The other piece of it that it enables is the analytics piece. So it enables the reporting and some of the interface dashboard pieces that you get as well with the location tracking or proximity piece. And then it also enables the API. So we have implemented API from the platform itself, so for integration into all the presence-based and proximity-based events and all the location data and those things as well. So the way the architecture works, of course, it ties into Wing. Air defense, if you know air defense, it uses the Wing infrastructure to do Wi-Fi sensing in the environment. So the first thing is we'd collect data from the APs and the infrastructure. That is sent back to the air defense platform, which actually does run on the NX. It runs on the NX series as well, the NX 9500 series. From there, it does all of its calculations, its things and analytics, sends that back. So now you have access to it in the UI. You have access to the data, and then it also external systems have access to this data through the APIs. And then that's where you get your reporting and you get your data alerts and device promotional messages and things like that from external systems.
Just have a quick question about that slide. Are the sensors only needed if you're doing an overlay system, but if you've got Motorola infrastructure, you don't actually need the sensors?
Right. So if it's a Motorola infrastructure, you can utilize the APs that are there. So our APs, they can run in several different modes. So and the radios are actually themselves inside the AP. So there's dedicated sensor mode. So that radio scans. It does a continuous scan. Then we also have what we call radio share mode. So you enable that on the APs on a WLAN radio that's actually servicing clients. You enable radio share mode. The AP then sends back information for the channel that it is actually set for. So you can overlay it. It can be overlaid over a third-party system as well. In that case, you would use dedicated sensors. And depending on the feature, depending on those three features, the presence or zone tracking or location tracking, I'm going to talk about it in detail, will also depend on the number of APs that you would need and what type of mode you're going to run it in the environment as well, right? So the first piece I'm going to talk about in detail is presence. So presence is it's basically the awareness of a device in the environment. And if you know the air defense platform, I mean, that's basically what it does. That's its inherent abilities, right? It's a Wi-Fi IPS appliance is what it originally was designed for. So we do presence detection. It's based on RSSI boundaries. So we have multiple boundaries in there. I'll explain that in a minute. We can generate we generate traditional alarms in ADSP, so we have traditional alarms. So any of the traditional events that we can generate from that, we can do the same thing with proximity. But we also push these events out through the API, and then data that we store is also available through the API. We can filter the notifications, so notifications and even configuration can be filtered. We set it up by client type, and that's where we can segment stations into groups of clients, and we can do it by scope. So we keep a scope tree based on an organizational tree. So the profile, the filtering can be set up per scope, And then we can also filter events by destination. So through the API where we're sending the data to, you can set up filters. I'm going to send to this endpoint. I want to only send certain types of proximity data. And if I'm going to send to this endpoint, I'm only going to send, maybe here I send presence data, here I'm actually sending location information. Presence requires minimal setup. And then going back to the overlay, presence is probably one of the easier ones to do overlay. In a traditional air defense deployment, pretty much if you had a WIPS deployment already, you could just utilize the WIPS infrastructure that's already there, and you could get your presence detection there. You just have to apply the licenses to the sensors. So we work on this concept of it's a RSSI threshold. We don't just say, okay, we see you, you're present. We set an RSSI threshold. It's configurable, and you have to reach that threshold before we say you're in the environment, right? And it's configurable by the end user. So you detect the signal, that information is sent back to ADSP. ADSP can send that information through the API to some event handler. And in this example, let's say we send a message to the end user, promotional message. So, like I said, we use RSSI thresholds. We actually have 3 of those. So you can set 3 different levels for presence. We have, so when a user walks in, so maybe in a retail environment, so one of these was big for retail. They want to track customer conversion. Customers, people they see outside, devices they see outside their store, and devices that are inside the store. They want to see how many of those come in. That's a big deal to them, right? So we created these different levels. And so we have 3 levels. So the first one, we could say, okay, well, we see this device out in the parking lot. So these are all the devices we see outside our building, out in the parking lot. They're not necessarily really close to the building and that type of thing. But now, this device has gotten closer. It's crossed our next threshold. These are all configurable. So now we're saying, okay, maybe it's right, they're standing outside our door. So maybe like in a mall environment, they're actually standing just outside the store, that type of thing. And then the third one, now we've set our RSSI threshold that we know that this device has actually entered the building. So now we know they're inside. So we get this, you can follow the user into the environment. So some of the data, this is pulled from some of the reports that we run. So there's all kinds of data you can get just from presence. So some of these we're showing visit duration. So it's the number of devices we've seen where their visit duration broken down by time buckets. So, how many people spent 0 to 15 minutes, how many people spent 15 to 30 minutes in our environment. And we keep tracking, that's visit durations.
Is the engaged visitors people that have actually associated and authenticated?
No. Engaged visitors it's based on time. So it's basically, you have engaged visitors, we have another one called bounce visitors. So engaged visitors, you set a time and it's configurable and you say, okay, I'm going to say that a device that comes in my environment and their visit is over 15 minutes, that they're an engaged visitor, that they're in the environment, they're spending time in the environment.
I would just argue that that's the husband sitting on the couch waiting for the wife trying on the shoes.
Could be, right.
And he's engaged in a different way while she's engaged in
right.
Because he's like looking at sports stats and stuff.
Yeah. Well, we do have another concept of the bounce visitor as well. I don't have the chart up here. And then it's basically the reverse of that. It's someone that we saw the device, they came in, they're within the environment, their visit was, below a defined amount, 5 minutes. They were in there, their visit was less than 5 minutes. They just came in, they either couldn't find what they wanted, or they came in, got what they wanted, and left. They didn't browse, they didn't look at other things, right? So your husband could be browsing,
Or I could get in and get out in 20 minutes flat and spend a couple $100.
But that's information that retailers want to know.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but this is just a sample of what we can get from just presence information, right? So I'll go over this really quickly, but these are just some of what's required from it. So ADSP does run as appliance currently. Like Shiv mentioned earlier, we're working on better integration with Wing, and so it won't necessarily be running as a separate appliance in the future. But currently it still runs at a separate appliance. It does require a license, and I know someone asked about licensing in Wing earlier. This is just like pretty much every module in ADSP. It's a per sensor license model. Does require the 9.0 version. APs and sensors. Presence supports pretty much any of the Wing APs and firmware that ADSP supports. So it'll go back to some of the 4X versions. But to get some of the more advanced features, you do have to go up to at least 5.2. And so I was talking about radio share. That's not available until you get up into the 5.2 range. And then high rate RSSI values. So before that, ADSP doesn't send back, or the Wing doesn't send back RSSI updates at a high rate. So if you want the quick detection, then you have to have the newer firmware. And then just the requirements on the client side is they just have to have, it does require that the Wi-Fi be enabled. They don't have to be associated, they just have to be enabled on the device. Zone tracking. So zone tracking is new to air defense. Doesn't show up very well, but this is a new feature in 9.1 that just released. So basically, zone tracking takes presence to a little bit coarser kind of location tracking, right? So we're just determining sensors that you're near. So a zone is defined as an area around the sensor. It's an RSSI threshold, similar to presence, but it's per sensor. So what you can do now is you can place sensors in key areas in the environment, or you could deploy them on all your sensors or your APs in the environment, and you could track someone's movement throughout the environment, or just determine, okay, I have a sensor in women's wear and I have a sensor in men's wear, and I can tell how many people are in this women's wear area and how many people are in men's wear. So you could just put them in key areas as well. It uses the notifications there. So of course we have the traditional alarm generation. We do generate location information, and basically what we do is we just return back the location of the sensor that they're closest to. So we do generate it. We do consider zone tracking a location tracking feature. You can track throughout the environment with it. And then we also push this information through the API as well. Notifications and things are the same types of filtering, filter by the groups of clients, which we call client types, and then based on location, based on scope, and based on destination of the information, where it's going to. And this one is a little slightly more complex, but it's still pretty easy to deploy. That's another reason we added zone tracking. We'll talk about location tracking, or position tracking is what we call it. That it gets a little more complex, and we found that our customers, once they got in and learned the complexity of setting up location tracking and what they got out of it, that we decided to add a new feature to give them a little more ROI. They could come in. This is easy to deploy. It doesn't take a lot of design time. It doesn't take a lot of configuration and setup to get zone tracking working. So same type of thing. So you can see here, just showing how we have the zone. Each sensor is a zone, and we detect. And it's basically the same type of thing, but now we can actually do things based on react to the environment based on where they are in the environment, not just because they're there, but we know they're in a certain location in the environment. Similar requirements, like I said, zone tracking requires 9.1, and then with Wing, it does require the same things for the advanced features like radio share and the high rate RSSI updates that we would need to get the quicker detection. And then we do, of course, now to be able to show location, we do require that you have to load floor plans into the system and place the sensors where they're located in the environment, that type of thing. And then just the client Wi-Fi has to be enabled. Position tracking. So this is what traditionally, when you hear Wi-Fi location tracking, we call it position tracking. We're just, because like I said, we consider zone tracking a type of location tracking. So we basically break into zone and position tracking. So this one gives you a little more tracked devices more individually. So you'll see them throughout the environment. It's higher granularity. You're not just saying, okay, well, we know they're near this sensor. We know they're in this area based on our location that we calculated, right? Same types of notifications, and then same filtering. But it is a little more complex to set up. It does require, there's more complex design requirements for it. It does require higher density of APs or sensors in the environment to be able to perform location tracking. And then it does require, to get best accuracy, some calibration in the environment, right? So it is more complex. So that's why we created this zone tracking that's kind of in between their presence and position tracking. Another example, just we can detect basically the same way as presence, but then now we have these regions, and when a device enters a region geofence, I'll talk about that in a minute, we can generate other notifications. It's the same requirements. It is not supported on the older air defense sensors, so it does require the newer APs. It's not supported on the older APs or the old air defense sensors. So now it does. So as far as to survey the environment, you do use Air Defense Mobile, which is a laptop survey and analysis tool, Wi-Fi analysis tool. Now, in our previous releases, 9.0 through 9.03, we did require that we only track devices that were associated to a network. They didn't have to be associated to the Motorola infrastructure. They just had to be associated. Now in 9.1, we'll track any device unassociated. They just have to have their Wi-Fi enabled. This is just an example of a report in the system that we can give. So it's basic. Most of our reports are based on regions. So you can define regions in the environment, and we'll track things like dwell time, number of. So here you can see that we have these 5 regions, and we're tracking how many devices are in the regions over time. So you can see where devices are going. This is what we call average device density. So it's finding hot spots in the environment where the user's going, devices going in the environment. Now these reports, so zone tracking and position tracking both apply to these reports, and they can be filtered too. You can say, I want to run this report just for zone track devices, or I want to run it just for position track devices and that type of thing as well. So location tracking events use what we call virtual regions. They're basically geofences that you define. We have 4 configurable events right now in it. We have proximity, enter, contain, and exit. Proximity is just the device is within a certain distance from a virtual region. Enter, obvious, they've entered a region. We generate an event off that. Contained is dwell. It's defined by amount of time. You can say if a device has been in that region for 10 minutes, then I want you to generate a contained event. And then exit is when the device has left the region. The regions have customizable attributes, the name, of course, what events are enabled on it, so you can enable events based on the regions themselves. And then active time for the region, so when the region's active, so you could say that this is a region, and when the store is closed, I don't want it to be active, because I don't want my after hours staff in there tripping the events as they're moving around the environment. So you could have it disable automatically. And then of course shape and color. So they're drawn on the floor plan.
So a quick question on if you can flip back there.
Yep.
So is there any nuance or any kind of quality control applied to things like an exit? I'm in the middle of the store. I obviously don't leave by tracking through the APs. I just turn my phone off, or my battery dies, or excuse me, anything like that. Is there any sort of, okay, that doesn't count as an exit, it's just a null event because it wasn't expected, you know what I mean?
Exit as far as we don't see the device anymore, and exit as far as you've left a region.
Well, take your pick. I'm saying what qualifies as an exit? The fact that I I left the region in an orderly fashion, or I just disappeared from the radar?
Right. So exits in general. So let's go back to presence for the first. We don't see you at all. and then that can apply to location tracking. For some amount of time, we don't see you. So both have a configurable value. So presence has a configurable value. You can say, well, after I can go and say, we call it the our device age out time. So in presence, you could say, okay, well, if I don't see the device for 10 minutes, then I'm going to say they've left the environment. So if for some reason I can't see you for some time within 10 minutes, but you show back up before the 10 minutes is over, then I didn't consider that you left the environment, and that's configurable. Now, location tracking has a similar value, the location age out. So basically, if we're not able to calculate a location for you for a certain amount of time, then we won't all just stop reporting on you. So it will basically returns the last known location until that age out is over. So usually the age out, the default's like 2 minutes. So if we don't see you for 2 minutes or see any change within 2 minutes, it's reporting the last known location until, okay, now we haven't seen them for 2 minutes, they must have really left. So we quit reporting on that device.
Is there some kind of, I don't know, buffer time or backout timer on these enabled events? So if you're geofencing and I just happen to be at a part of the store that I continually register as within the fence and outside the fence and within the fence, like I don't want to generate an event every 2 seconds, even though I'm not really doing anything.
So that's why we created we have this dwell contained event. So when because usually when someone we get feedback, usually they want, when someone enters a region, that's when they want to generate this event. Mm-hmm. And so we created this contained event. So you could say the device location has to be there for 30 seconds or a minute, and then it'll generate. So if there was a region that was basically the same type of thing, they were like, well, if I have a customer they're trying to get over to this department and they just walk through this department, I don't necessarily want to generate an event because they're just walking through. Okay. I want to make sure that they're actually there engaged in that department. So you could that's what the contained event's for, right? And regions can be overlapped too. So you could have a region that has one setting and another region that has another different settings, and they could overlap each other for some reason if you wanted to do that as well. It doesn't. So you could mix and match different ways to do it, but right. So let's see here. So customized tracking. So I had talked about client types earlier. So client types are just groups of stations, and we assign those. There's several ways to assign them. You could do it manually, so you could just go in the UI and you could say, okay, I want to assign this client type to this device. Or we can use pattern matching rules. So we can especially in 9.1, it's pretty real time. You set up rules based on, okay, they're connected to this SSID, and we've never seen them here or that or whatever. You can set up rules, and it'll automatically apply a client type to that device based on the rules that are set. You could import through a file, so you could do a file import. So if you had a list, so we do have like a retailers that they have a list of every Wi-Fi device that they use in the store, and they know the MAC address, and we can import those and put them into a group automatically through a client type. Or you could do it through the API. So if another system wanted to assign a client type to a device, then they could send ADSP and say, we basically just want to assign this client type to this device, right? And that's useful for filtering, being able to push through the API, because maybe they only want to track, so for privacy reasons, they're only going to track devices. They only want to keep information on devices that have opted in to be tracked, right? So what they can do is they can set up on their on the API that says, okay, only send location, or only track devices that are assigned to my loyalty customers that opted in, whatever your group that you set up, and you can push those, so the system can add those to the group through the API. So they could add it, and so it's flexible. And then also, like I just mentioned, you customize the settings per client type. So as far as tracking goes, it is customizable per client type. So you could just have a group that we only are tracking presence on them, or you could have a group that we're just doing location tracking, or you have a group that we're tracking everything, or you could even set the update time. So we can set I only care to update their location, these stations, every 30 seconds or once a minute or something like that. So you could have different settings for different groups. And then it does also allow for filtering in the live view interface, the historical views, and in the report, so you can filter your data based on groups, the client groups that are there. The APIs. So in the APIs, you get presence events, location data, you get location-based events, and we do also provide the RSSI data. We don't really have anyone really using the RSSI data stream, but most everyone uses the presence events or location data. So presence events are just events when we detect a device in the environment. We send an inner event. We tell you what threshold they've crossed, what sensor saw them, what was the RSSI level. So you get all kinds of information from it. Location data is just the XY location of the device. Location data also indicates if it was a zone track device or a position track device. And then we also have location-based events, and those are the events generated by the regions when devices are interacting with the regions.
So, just all of that being said, which is a mouthful, a lot of nuance. Who's digesting all of this in a retail environment? Not who's using the data, but who's digesting it and presenting it to the people who use it? If you know what I'm saying,
right?
Because there's a lot here, and you can see different stories in the data sets.
Yeah. So I'm actually was going to talk about a solution that we have, but that ties into the API. So we do have a solution that we've been working on. We just released the first version of it recently, called Connected Shopper. It uses this interface. We use the presence and location events to generate push notifications and SMS messages to the customers and that type of thing.
Maybe in the same vein of his question, we're talking about engaging people. We're talking about location and presence and devices that we want on our network and our own assets. Is it maybe time to revisit the word defense in our product?
As far as security based?
Yeah, because what's the security play, right?
The feature wasn't really designed for security. We've gotten that question a few times, but in general,
I mean, it's clearly not focused at security.
Right,
It's clearly
it's not.
focused at retail
It wasn't
engagement.
really designed in that sense. I mean, there's a few things you could do around it. I mean, like I said, I think I mentioned it earlier, is that we do generate the normal type traditional air defense alarms, and so you can apply normal air defense actions to those alarms. So you see some device that's present.
Functionality, you're saying?
Sorry?
You're saying you're still doing the whip functionality.
You could apply it. You'd have to be careful, because I've had some people come up with some wild ideas about location tracking and trying to terminate people and terminate connections, and you probably don't want to do that, because you could come out with some weird results on that. But you could generate certain things. It would just depend. So we haven't really gone into a lot of development for that, because we haven't really had a lot of anyone ask for trying to tie security features into location or presence detection. Not that it couldn't be done, it's just we haven't really focused a lot on that.
Is this API open? Do you need to sign up any developer agreements, or can I just hit a web address and see all this documentation?
The documentation is not posted, but if you have air defense, it's right there's the SDK. The SDK information is so if you ever use air defense, there's a download page to download toolkits and things used for the air defense platform, and right in there is a link to download the SDK, and it's anyone asks for it, we'll give it to them. So it's an open SDK. Yep.
What's the latency between events happening and data showing up for the API?
So it only takes, it depends on configuration, but if you set everything to, like I said, so you could have your update time from the sensors is configurable. So if you set everything to the lowest or the highest rate possible, it only takes a few seconds. Okay. Maybe 30 seconds at the most. But it also depends on how much. So if it's someone that's not associated, like someone mentioned, if your phone's in your pocket and you're not using it, it may take us longer to detect it because they're just not transmitting, and it just takes longer to find. But if they're, if we're actively seeing things from that device, it only takes a few seconds to see it. Yeah. So there are two we kind of call them two, they're the same API, but two implementations. So this was the original implementation, and it was, basically the third-party system had to initiate a connection to ADSP and request information from the system. It is HTTPS socket connection. We have a Java library. It's in the SDK file you can download from the appliance that has the Java doc information. It has example code implementations and example apps already compiled for it. It does have some streaming methods, but then it also, most people, you would use this method here, or this method for query. So you wanted to query for historical information, you would use this method of connecting to the appliance. So in 903, we added push data. So this is where ADSP actually initiates a connection out and just starts streaming location data. So we call them subscribers. So you define a subscriber in ADSP, you tell it the URL, authentication information, and that type of thing. So it connects out to a web service and starts sending out data. It still uses an HTTPS socket connection. It uses, of course, its streaming methods, the location subscriber profile. And then, so in 9.0, the original implementation through 903, the format for both interfaces was a binary format. It uses protocol buffers, if you know what that is. But in 9.1, we implemented JSON format to just make it easier for implementation integration for development reasons. So, and it's actually, you can pick. So now in 9.1, you can pick which format you want. And then we also include, so far as the protocol buffers, we actually provide the proto file so that developers can know the definitions. So I already mentioned it, but I was going to talk about, I'm going to pull up the interface here, but we talked about the APIs, and I talked about Connected Shopper. And so Connected Shopper is a solution that we've just released the first version of. In the past, or just recently. And it uses features within, it uses the proximity features in ADSP. So we've developed an app, and I could show it to you if you want to see it offline. But basically we've created this, it's an app that we've created. It has push notification, and the whole platform. It has a platform back into it that we have. Then we have Android and iOS apps that we've developed an SDK for development into third-party apps if they want to use the features in the platform. But the platform itself does utilize the proximity features within ADSP. It utilizes the API. We take presence information, location data, and all these, and we can generate. We have a rule-based engine within the Connected Shopper platform that we can take this presence and location information and generate push notifications, push promotions through the app, through Google or Apple push notifications, or we can do SMS notifications and that type of thing. And of course, it has all the opt-in, user opt-in ability and all that stuff is within Connected Shopper as well.
While you're talking about mobile devices, what's the status of Hotspot 2.0 802.11u support in the Motorola product lines?
You're going to have to ask one of those guys about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Hotspot 2.0 or 802.11u support. Right, we're talking about mobile retail analytics, engaging the customers.
Yes,
right.
so Hotspot 2.0 is coming in 5.5. We have Passpoint built into it. Okay. So with the SSIDs, you should be able to configure AT&T, Verizon, any of that stuff, which will then show up on your handhelds, as long as they're Hotspot 2.0 compliant.
Okay.
All right. All right. So this is just, I was showing the interface in ADSP. So this is just the UI in ADSP showing devices that we're actually tracking live in our innovation center in Schaumburg. So these are devices being tracked. You can kind of see, so some of you, if you know the IPS pieces of it, we have the sanctioned and unsanctioned. You can actually see that. So red devices are unsanctioned devices and green are sanctioned devices for security reasons. But so we can filter those by device types. So these are those client types I was talking about that you could go in and we can filter by those. We could actually go in and just, well, that just shows everything. But let's see, search for a device. You could go and enter the name or MAC address of a device, whatever ADSP knows, and we can go and find the location of that single device or multiple devices. You can add a list. I don't have a 9.1 system that I can get to from here, but in 9.1 we do have there's extra features in there now that you can filter by if they're zone track devices, if they're unassociated devices, if they're associated devices, and that type of thing as well. And then we do have in the live interface we have that device density heat map that I had mentioned before, so you can see live the device density within the environment. You could turn off the locations. We could actually show the names and things like that. But we can go back and do forensics on location, so you can go back and do historical searches and say, okay, was this device in the environment at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon or whatever, right? And then these areas here are virtual regions within the environment, on the floor plan. We do have, so you can see here kind of the settings. So zone tracking, actually in 9.1 there's some more settings in here. This is 9.1, but you can see here we can define what events we want to trigger and the active time range and things like that for a region. And it also is a match between client types, so you could actually disable a certain event for a certain client type. So if you didn't want them to trigger for some reason, you didn't want some devices to trigger proximity events or something like to a region, then you could go and disable that in the client type and it won't generate those, it won't trigger those events. So it is a match. And I was going to show here, it had a question on alarms, or the WIP stuff. So we do have these traditional alarms. So you can see here, presence, enter, and exit. There's should be some location region ones here, so you can see region contained, and there's extra. Let me see if I can grab this. In here you can see what region it was and what sensor saw them and what the time was and that type of thing, right? But there's not a whole lot to show in location tracking. I can show you devices being tracked and alarms being triggered. But so if anyone has any other questions about it, or any general questions about ADSP in general, any other questions? So. All right. Connected shopper, can I ask about that one?
How do you find this being adopted so far, or is it even out there beyond test and trial, or?
So far, we've had a large number of our customer base is very interested in location tracking, but it is kind of we've had several a good group of them doing proof of concepts. Most of our base is retail, so they do testing to determine what their ROI is going to be on it, and is it worth their time. So we have several of them testing it out, and then there's some. Recently, a lot of them are trying to kind of be careful about it with all the, privacy concerns and things like that. And that's a big thing for us as well. We're working on solutions within our connected shopper solution and some other things we're working on to help give the end user more control over their privacy in this, using this type of technology and other technologies that we have.